For nearly 20 years, Ethan Walker had owned one of the largest private tree farms in the county. The land had been passed down through 3 generations of his family. Every acre represented decades of hard work and careful management. Logging season was only a few months away. One morning, Ethan decided to inspect a remote section of his property. It was an area he hadn't visited for several weeks. What he discovered there would change everything. As Ethan rounded a bend in the road, he froze. Construction equipment was moving across his land. Workers were clearing trees and preparing building sites without permission. Several cabin foundations had already been completed. Freshly cut stumps covered the area where mature trees once stood. Ethan immediately knew thousands of dollars worth of timber had been destroyed. The damage was worse than he first imagined. Hundreds of valuable pine trees had been removed. The construction stretched far beyond what anyone could call a simple mistake. When Ethan asked who authorized the project, the workers pointed toward a nearby housing development. They claimed the HOA had purchased the land for a future vacation cabin community. The neighboring HOA had recently expanded its development plans. Apparently, someone had convinced the board that the tree farm land belonged to them. No one had bothered to verify ownership. Ethan immediately visited the county records office. The documents were crystal clear. Every acre where the cabin stood legally belonged to him. The HOA president, Richard Collins, refused to admit any wrongdoing. Instead, he insisted that Ethan's records must be outdated. The board voted to continue construction anyway. Richard even brought HOA bylaws to the construction site. In front of workers and residents, he claimed HOA authority over the entire area. Ethan listened quietly and said very little. Instead of arguing with the HOA, Ethan chose a different path. He gathered every property deed, survey map, and tax record he owned. Then he quietly filed a formal legal complaint with the county. Within days, county surveyors arrived at the site. Their measurements confirmed exactly what Ethan already knew. Every cabin under construction sat on his private tree farm. Richard Collins refused to accept the survey results. He accused county officials of making mistakes. The more evidence appeared, the louder he became. Several HOA board members started to worry. They realized millions of dollars had already been invested into the project. Yet construction continued despite repeated warnings. Ethan noticed something important. The HOA was rushing to finish the cabins. They seemed convinced that completing the project would somehow strengthen their position. Meanwhile, logging season was approaching. Ethan had already signed contracts months earlier. Harvest operations were scheduled to begin right on time. Ethan met with his logging contractors. He explained the unusual situation but made one thing clear. The harvest plan would proceed exactly as approved. By early autumn, many of the cabins were complete. Some owners even began planning weekend visits. Few realized the legal dispute was far from over. The county eventually issued formal notices. The documents clearly stated that the cabins sat on privately owned land. Compliance deadlines were included. Richard assured residents that everything was under control. He claimed Ethan was bluffing and would never interfere with the project. Many residents believed him. Then logging season finally arrived. Before sunrise, dozens of machines rolled onto Ethan's property. Every permit and approval had already been secured. The logging crews followed the approved forestry plan exactly. Trees designated for harvest were carefully marked and processed. The operation remained completely legal. Cabin owners quickly noticed the activity. The quiet forest atmosphere they expected suddenly changed. Heavy equipment could be heard throughout the area. Richard stormed toward the logging crews, demanding they stop. The supervisors calmly presented permits, contracts, and county approvals. Everything was fully authorized. For the first time, Richard understood the seriousness of the situation. Ethan wasn't making threats. He was simply exercising his rights as a landowner. Word spread quickly among cabin owners. Many demanded answers from the HOA board. Questions about property ownership became impossible to ignore. County inspectors returned to evaluate the situation. Their findings were straightforward. The cabins had been built inside an active commercial tree farm. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Residents wanted to know how such a massive mistake had happened. Richard struggled to provide clear answers. While the HOA scrambled for solutions, Ethan remained patient. His legal team continued documenting every development. The evidence kept growing stronger. By the end of the first week of logging season, reality had finally set in. The HOA's cabin project stood directly in the middle of Ethan's working tree farm, and the biggest consequences were still ahead.